now in ED territory after the power transfer last year, and a GNU or an inclusive government like what we had Tsvangirai and Mugabe at the time actually produced more without necessarily taking away the authority of the state. Because what is at stake here is the state stepping down and saying, look, we give you these professionals all the power to take the country forward. That is not going to happen. But what will happen is professionals being brought in this instance, by the ED administration and helping the administration move forward. That's what I thought would happen and move away from the elections. And that will bring in more legitimacy than the situation where we rattle forward failed elections, which might produce more uncertainty than what we have now. So the goodwill we created last year through Mugabe stepping down should have been used to do that. The transitional authority now, I don't think that will work. I think there's actually legislation that goes around that internationally. The sitting government has to declare that it has failed to run the country and hand over power to technocrats. It will never happen in Africa. I need to see a model that that has taken place in Africa.
Well, I think the key concept to think with is what I call material conditions of existence. The material conditions of existence now are not the same ones at the time when the GNU was in place. Important is that taught us a number of things. It's not the same. Okay? It just doesn't. That's what I meant by problem space, making sense of what it now means. We're not in identical moments in which the only thing to happen was the GNU. Yes? We are in a moment, as far as I can see, where there is a hotly contested election and people think they're going to win or lose, God knows what, in which a result, if what we see is a development, is going to emerge. Now, it depends what the outcome of that be, whether a minority or majority government decides it's going to run the show on its own or in coalition with somebody else. That's a completely different story from the architecture of NTA or GNU. And it's a very important observation to make, that is distinct from the material conditions then and now. That's one. The other point, and this really has to do with the other 3 points that we've made about the British. I think I wouldn't ask Ibo what about the British. He doesn't live here. That's unfair. Okay? I would ask some of us who live here, because some of us have a practical engagement with British politics. The problem with Britain is Bridgetown after Brexit. Yeah, I said Bridgetown, British. It used to be an island. It's now a town. Yeah, a little town. The island is gone. Boris Johnson thinks of global Britain. They still think of the empire. The last thing he needs, getting out of the EU-AU negotiations, is to have a Commonwealth in which Zimbabwe was not a thorn on its backside. They're driven by that. Don't have an illusion. Nobody in their sane mind seriously ever thought that human rights was the same argument. They did not pursue this argument because of human rights. I mean, Ibra and I wrote this in 2002, but you have to think about the rhetoriologies that construct the British foreign policy in relation to Africa. That has not disappeared. Right. Okay. So what does it mean? It means actually Zimbabwe holds all the cards in as far as the argument between Britain and Zimbabwe is concerned. Okay? Robert Mugabe had faced these people off about the regime change agenda. I didn't say he was successful. It had lost its momentum. The black consensus had collapsed. They had nowhere else to go. Part of it is because the things that drove the British argument were not the same questions that Zimbabweans themselves are interested in. What's our lesson? We should never again outsource our struggles to somebody else because they can change any minute. Now, why am I saying that? Because the languages that we've used to try to describe our world, I don't have a sense of them having a material condition of existence of the stuff that takes place in our area. I really don't. I'm not saying there's no poverty there. I'm not saying there are no housing issues there. I'm not saying that people require defense of the state. None of that. I'm simply saying in the period of articulation, there is a disjuncture. So we're going to have to give that all up and go to the drawing board. Actually, Africa has been talking about its own renaissance. It is not new. And this idea that, unless we gave up writing or reading, people have been talking about democracies as a hybrid of which is participative, representative, and distributive. Those three elements. It's a becoming, it's universal is where you go to. It's not where you begin. So, yes. So the point I'm making is it really is a dumb version of what people began. It's not saying elections are not important. Sometimes that category stands in the way of trying to understand what the issue is. And part of it is because we're still thinking in the old soundtrack. So we have to make a break.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes, please.
Just a quick comment to echo what Doctor said and what you've been hinting at slowly is so here in the UK I've spoken to different investors who were excited about the transition of power or what happened in Zimbabwe, hoping that in the first 100 days like some form of legislation or regulation would come out to reassure investors that once you bring your money in, we will be able to keep it secure. But what the Zimbabwean government have failed to do, the new government, is even ensure investors here in the UK and abroad that they can run their money back securely enough to be able to keep their money safe, let alone what investors here want to do. And I say that as somebody who's working with investors who say, we're happy to bring our money in, but we're waiting for your government to show us that they can actually control money coming in themselves. And they worry that what happened with Mugabe and the UN donations, when money just suddenly went missing and programs didn't happen, because where did that money go? They expect something like that to happen unless the government show them this is the regulatory framework we have. And either IMF or another international agency show them that we have a secure way of making sure you get your money back.
Thank you.
Back to Arnold. I think Albert asked about rally attendances and whether that is an indicator of voter intention.
Okay, so I live in Zimbabwe actually, but I do come and study. So in terms of the rallies, we can't draw so many conclusions out of the attendance. So if a rally in Harare maybe has 10,000 people, or maybe a march has 10,000, or 20,000, or 30,000, that's still less than 10% of the people who vote in Harare only. But in terms of the optics, it's good optics, it shows that the opposition is building momentum. It also shows the great interest in, let's say, in Chirezi. Because if you remember in 2013, when Morgan Tsvangirai went to Mutoko, people were literally running away from him, if you still remember those videos and images during the 2013 But now, Nelson Chamisa can go to Mutoko, people can come out, and so it's not just, but also at the same time, it's not just about him being able to pull out the crowds. The political space is opened up. Though I disagree with Dr. Manasa that the state is disintegrated, that's why they're not really sort of like freedoms that are just coming from themselves. But I think they've loosened, they haven't really, ZANU-PF hasn't loosened the grip on the key state institutions, but they've just made sure that people who go into the streets, then they won't stop you. They'll equally manipulate that situation as well. They demonstrate to whoever's watching the international community to show that people can actually campaign, they can do all those things. But just about the voting intentions, I think the closest to voting intentions might be the Afrobarometer survey, which shows how people are going to be voting. It's also debatable, but I think that's the closest. And then the rallies, they definitely show that the NDC has support, they still have support. But the other question is that do people vote do they just go in certain areas? Are they just going to vote out of their own volition? Do you just wake up and say, I'm going to vote? Or there is a machinery that gets votes out, which I feel that ZANU-PF still has that machinery. We're not yet sure whether it will be effective in June in this coming election, but there's still that system of chiefs. There's still the system of the DA who distributes food aid. There's still there's still the resettlement funds are still there. Tenure security is still tied to political affiliation. So all those things are still there, but we're not yet sure whether they'll have the huge deal in this coming election. So the rallies are certainly great and they're indicators for other things, but in terms of voting intentions, I'm not sure whether we can draw so many conclusions.
Just a small little bit. I think I hear Igor is saying you need to think about the state always is both coercive, it comes by consent and coercion. I think what is an indicative, I don't want to say 100%, there is a mood in which the coercive actions of the state have gone down. I think that's what he means by it's gone into chaos. It can't control things in that way. Some people might say it's a good thing. Some people might say it's not a good thing. Do you see what I mean? So I don't think it has disappeared. I mean, it would be an illusion for us to say it's gone somewhere else. Now, the last thing you just said about the chiefs, it's precisely because what I said before about the alliances that make up ZANU-PF. Okay, some of us were involved in discussions around ZIPA many years ago. And one of the problems ZIPA had was that it wanted to distinguish itself from freedom fighters, ancestral spirits, and the chiefs as a component of the armed struggle. And what ZANU did was to give power to the chiefs. They ain't going to give it up simply because the constitutional court has said so. You have to go to the architecture of the party to remove it. Do you know what I mean? That's the reason I keep going to what is this? What is the architecture we're looking at?
Thanks, George. I'll ask Dr. Mandaza. You've said the military runs elections, and what's the evidence?
The evidence is there, I see it. Well, in 2008, don't live there. So 2008, for the runoff, the military was deployed.
Okay, sorry, I need to be clear. I'm talking about the current situation because, I mean, from what we read in the newspapers and everything, which is the only evidence, the only things that I've got, there's been so many things that have changed since Mugabe left power. In November, and also this year we've got the BVR system, we've got all these, as we say, people are free to campaign wherever they want. So whereas there might have been military influence in 2008, 2013 and everything else, what are we basing our, so if we're going to discredit this coming election on the basis that the military is running it, what can we say we have to prove that, you know, because...
The answer, first of all, I mean, you had the ZEC acknowledge that they have up to 15% of their staff from the military.
Okay. Sorry, I understand that. In this country and everywhere else, the military, when they retire, they have to join. They have to join the civil service. They go into the government institutions. In our places where we work, construction, wherever it is, you've got lots of military people. They have the right to also join the mainstream workforce. So being former military does not, as far as I see, does not necessarily mean that you are going to be, you're no longer military, you're former military. So we just want to sort of like, what I'm trying to get to is if you are going to present...
We have evidence, I have evidence of military being involved in the electoral process. That's the point I'm making.
All right, let's move on. We've got, excuse me, we've got, all right. I'll give you, I need to give you an opportunity to ask a question. We've got the last round of questions due now because we have less than 10 minutes to go. Dr. Machai and Farai and Winston,
Thank you very much. My question is focused on the way we are now, post-elections, going forward. We mentioned, I think, a number of speakers have talked about the diaspora as a possible source. Was maybe 60-something%, which was mentioned. So my question is, what would you see as the agendas that the diaspora should seize itself with going forward? If it's supposed to be part of the answer to the problems that we have as a nation.
Thanks, Paul. Farai.
My question would definitely echo his in the context of, we tend to make dogma, or rather we push a narrative so much so that it ends up becoming truth based on nothing. So on the question of the military, should they be damned to unemployment purely because we think that they'll have some influence on the election? Are they not citizens? And is this the basis of evidence that we're utilizing to suggest that the military would be involved in the election? That would be my question.
Okay. Winston.
Thank you very much to all the speakers for your very insightful comments on the elections. I think we've had very diverse perspective on what is happening from civil society, the role of the youth. Well, often ignored. I think the youth a significant number of voters, if not 60% of the voters. Yet their issues are marginalized there. The civil society, you say that they are not funded properly, and they may be ineffective in what they are doing, which is quite interesting. And Dr. Mandaza's perspectives on how the state and the political parties themselves may not be as strong as before, that they are disintegrating. It's an interesting perspective which I'm thinking about. And Lloyd's comment that perhaps instead of having elections, we should perhaps think of postponing them and putting our attention on reforming the state, making it more efficient. And George's perspectives on how we should think of, we should have an intergenerational kind of conversation about what is going on, where we harmonize different views. I think it's also very interesting. My question is about what we as observers and analysts of this Zimbabwe situation can make of these elections in terms of the limitations. We are aware of the limitations. We know that elections are not sometimes bringing out the best outcome. But when you look at the voters in Zimbabwe, most of them, they are quite enthused. When you look at the energy, the rallies, most of them, they are going there thinking that this is a moment to change. So my question is, are we being too cynical? Are we not supposed to to give the elections a chance? If we postpone them, or if we shelve them, as Lloyd seems to be suggesting, what is the alternative?
Okay. And to that last round of questions, I will also add mine to the panel. You raised the issue of the Afrobarometer survey, which gave all of the parties, or the main parties, less than 50%, and suggested that it might be headed towards a runoff. Now, you talked about how Dr. Mandaza says the state has collapsed, or rather that Arnold says it's rolled back, and so the coercive force or the coercive face of the state has retreated from the foreground, as it were. Would that be the case in an election that produces a runoff? Okay, let's start from you.
Just wanted to fresh me. The reason I'm trying to say let's back off the election is not because elections are too important. I think that the electoral politics are only one bit of the core. And I think because we're so obsessed with the core, understandably, my argument we're missing the story. Okay? And the story in part requires us to really seriously do the hard work of what exactly is the nature of our society and politics. How am I to reproduce what sort of world do you want to live in? As a country, as part of the region, as part of the continent, as part of the global south. Yes? What kind of world do we live in? What would it take? What sort of template would we need in order to do that? Now, that's not something you can resolve in the context of an electoral cycle. I don't go to political parties. I like political parties to come to me. Right? So we have to have that discussion about ourselves, about what kind of world we want to live in. Okay. The second bit I would say is again in relation to the military. Well, you know, if the doctors and nurses go on strike in this country, there might come in a moment in which the government of the day decides to deploy the military to run the hospital. You know what I mean? The military can be deployed to do that. I'm not saying that is right or wrong. I'm saying, but it can happen. The questions are, under what conditions would that happen?
Yeah.
What are those conditions? And I don't think we can put into place that says, thou shalt not deploy the army to go and clean the roads. Would rather want to, thou shalt have our public sectors, including military, accountable to us. Right? Which is completely, we need to turn the conversation round so it's not seen this either or. Just because parents, some people for 10 years thought it was my brother, for Christ's sake. Just because parents is there does not mean the military is there. It may be. It doesn't mean that. And I think we need to unpack it a little bit more so that we can identify what sort of society world we want to live in. And I've finished with intergenerational politics. Intergenerational politics is a conversation from 2 points. Being young is necessarily being modern. And what does it mean being modern? And I caricature one or two people later and say, you know, if you tell me being modern is to come back to Christian fundamentalist authoritarian politics, please give it up. That doesn't sound like young to me. That sounds like you're just entering the 20th century for the third time. You know what I mean? So we need to distinct, we need to think very seriously what that means. Okay. My identity is not complete. I'm at the beginning of time, all the time. Okay. The question is, what does it mean in the material conditions? Not just about jobs, although sometimes it's about jobs. It's more to do with the wealth by option, if you like, the kind of wealth people want to live in. And the importance of having that dialogue is I can share with you my Barclays, you know, my playlist. We play music as a DJ since 1962, you just arrived, you play Bhangra or something. We want to go together and play dance, so we can dance together in that kind of convivial way. That's what I would like to see as a kind of future.
Thanks, George. Just to make sure that these last round of questions are all answered. Paul's question is on the diaspora and what agenda should it be seized with in order to play, you know, a part in the unfolding Zimbabwe, whether now or after the elections and going forward. So,
well, I think first of all, the diaspora, to the extent that we have 68 to 70% outside the country, constitutes a major deficit on the Zimbabwean economy. Secondly, the diaspora is contributing 4 billion a year in remittances, which is about the same as the national budget. So, and it explains in many respects why many families have survived under different circumstances. So one cannot underestimate the role of the diaspora in Zimbabwe. I only regret that it is not highlighted the way it should be, especially the circumstances of Zimbabwe.
And I think Futi has raised the issue of former soldiers having the right to serve in civilian institutions of state, and so.
Yeah, I don't get involved in any debate about the military. First of all, the revelation about 2,500 soldiers having been deployed last year was made by former members of the government themselves. In other words, by Asukwere and Jonathan Moyo, who were party or part of the election campaign for 2018, before the coup. They are the ones who made it clear that 2,500 soldiers were deployed across the country. Okay? Secondly, Rugeja's appointment as National Group Officer is not accidental. Just to do that. Okay. Now, so I don't want to get involved in that argument. But I'm not even talking about the ZEC officials from the military, because we know how they got there in the first place. No, we know how they got there. They got there in 2000. Okay? As a deliberate deployment by the military. We know that. I know that.
Moving on, Lloyd, Winston asked about these elections. We might be cynical about what they portend, whether they are a game changer or whether they open up, you could say perhaps maybe Zimbabwe's transition going forward. But the people are enthused by these elections, and they're excited about these elections, and they perceive them the moment of change.
The excitement that you see in the rallies in Zimbabwe is a carryover of what happened in November last year. But let's look at this in the context of postponing elections. You see, we have an opportunity to change the political culture. Our model of contestation is wrong. And it's been wrong for so many years. Mugabe held elections since 1980 religiously every 5 years. But we got to a point where our elections were labeled as illegitimate. And that set Zimbabwe backwards. For me, this was an opportunity that had availed itself for us to reform literally almost everything. And Mnangagwa is the beneficiary of all these reforms. And this is what he said when he came into power last year, and we're all on board with that. My concern is, yes, people are like the grass. They blow this way, they blow that way. It's a non-political stance. You come today, you say one thing to them, you go back, and tomorrow you say one thing to them. It's just that's the way politics is set. What we need is a situation where we look at this thing holistically. Let us be clear. We will not move forward as a country with the models that we have. The winner-takes-all model does not work. We need to have an election contestation model that takes into consideration the losers as well. Yeah? So if we're the winner-takes-all, Mnangagwa wins and takes everything, he sets up the state the way he would set it up. If Chamisa wins, he sets up the state of the way he set it up. So there is no room for the person who has lost. But bear in mind that the person who has lost had people who voted for him. So all these are things that we should have sorted out now without going to an election in July 30. That is where I look at it. I know George is
I'll move on to give Ethel and Arnold the opportunity to wrap up before we can bring the discussion to a close. Ethel.
My final comments, I think, I'm going to focus on what the diaspora can start doing, where we are. So firstly, I don't think the diaspora should be waiting for our government to come back and say, we really need your help this way. Because as you know, they can't even coordinate themselves well within a country. But I think that rather it's for us as the diaspora to have a vision for what we want Zimbabwe to look like, not just in Zimbabwe, but within the African context. What kind of a Zimbabwe do we want to go back to call home? What kind of a Zimbabwe do we want to be proud to call ourselves as Zimbabweans from? And I think, so partly that's vision, but that's also coordination between us as Zimbabweans in the diaspora, saying we all have skills and we all can contribute something to making that vision, creating a vision, one, but two, making that vision a reality. Like, what can we do here to make a vision of what we want in Zimbabwe to look like? That could be financing people in Zimbabwe to start their projects, doing whatever they're doing. But I think initially it starts with us getting together here and coming up with a coordinated plan of making that happen. And adding on to that, a little plug. I'm creating a platform called Generation Africa that will be launching in October, Black History Month, during Black History Month. And it's not just limited to Zimbabweans, because I think there's so much we can learn from other countries, especially Nigeria, Ghana, and all these different other countries with strong leadership and strong youth platforms. And it brings together young youth from the diaspora, but everybody's welcome to come and help build this vision of what we want Africa to look like. And from that, then there's different branches of what each country wants to look like. And it's about bringing people who are successful here in the diaspora saying, what are you doing where you are? Like, okay, how can we make that translate into what's going on in Zimbabwe at the moment? And it's about making sure that we're inspiring those in the diaspora to aspire to go back. Because a lot of people don't even